John chapter 11. Man, what a story. One of Jesus' closer friends in the world. And he gets the message that he is sick. And you would expect the Son of God with His abilities to immediately start. And He looks at the disciples and they're expecting to go, and He says, we're going to wait. There's no hurry. This is not a sickness that's unto death. And they're confused. Well, that's a good thing. Everything must be okay at some point. Time passes and Jesus says, all right, now let's go. And they think everything's fine. And Jesus said, you don't understand. I've delayed because I am about to make a point. I am about to show you something that you have not seen before. Lazarus is dead. And I'm going to go and I'm going to visit. And then I'm about to wow you. And so they do. They make the trip. And Jesus meets with the two sisters, other dear friends of His. And He consoles them, and there's the conversation about who He really is and about the fact that He's the resurrection, that He's the life. We see Jesus weep. And then the text that we read, it picks up. It's time to go and visit the grave. And so He goes out of the house and He is headed to the tomb, and the crowds are following. And Jesus says, remove the stone. Sister says, that's foul. That stinks. He's been there 4 days, Jesus. And it's one of those moments like we saw with the disciples this morning. And He looks at her and said, what did I just tell you? What did you miss about this conversation? Roll the stone away. And they roll the stone away, and He has set the stage for this moment. And I love the prayer. I love the boldness of the prayer. Father, I thank You that You have already heard me. I know how this is going to end. Father, in fact, I'm going to thank You that You always hear me. But I'm doing this for them. They need to understand who I am. This is one of those moments where Jesus takes the big flashing arrow with the bright lights and maybe the horn, and He is pointing at Himself. This is so they can understand who I am and the kind of communication that we have as Father and Son. In verse 43, Lazarus come forth. And there is no power in existence that can keep that man in the grave. The resurrection and the life has spoken. And Lazarus walks out of the tomb. I'm going to leave it there for just a second. Acts chapter 2. Peter and the disciples take the stage. And they begin to recount the fact that this is the day. This is the day that Joel talked about. This is the day that Isaiah talked about. This is the day that Daniel talked about. This is the fulfillment of prophecy. And they begin to explain who Jesus is. And Peter makes the point in verse 24 that it was impossible for death to hold him. No power on earth could have kept Jesus in the tomb. Now take that statement and I want you to flip back to Matthew chapter 27. Chapter 28, excuse me. Right at the end of 27, they've put him in the tomb. They've walked away. The time has passed that's necessary. The first day of the week rolls around. Their Sabbath is over, so they can go back and visit. They can go back and finish taking care of the body. And the text says, after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, because an angel had rolled the stone away. No power in existence could have stopped Jesus from walking out of that tomb. But here's the side note. Here's why I went to Matthew, because we're going to jump to John's account now. Here's why I went to Matthew. This is two earth-shaking quakes in 3 days' time in Jerusalem. How do you keep missing it? How do you not catch it? When he dies, the earth shakes. When he comes forth, the earth shakes. Who's in control here? Who is in control? It's Him. He's the control. He's the power. He's the source. But I want to point out a difference, and there are several. But I want you to go to John's account. And you know, there's differences like what? The difference in who calls Lazarus out of the tomb and who walks out of his own tomb. There's differences in the fact that Lazarus didn't know when his time was going to come and he was going to die and that he was going to have to be resurrected. Jesus did. Jesus prophesied his in advance. But there's another one. In John chapter 11 and verse 44, after Jesus called him out of the tomb, what did it say? It said he walked out with his grave clothes still on him. He's wrapped head to foot. He's wrapped head to toe in grave wrappings for his burial. He is still connected to death, and they have to remove the wrappings so that he can return to life in this world for a while. John chapter 20, verse 5. Peter and John have sprinted that foot race to the tomb, and stooping and looking in, he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. So Peter also came following him, entered the tomb, beheld the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth which has been on his head, not lying with the other wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Lazarus was still connected to death. Jesus was not. He left the grave clothes behind. Why? How could he? The answer's in Revelation when he meets John again. I quoted part of it this morning, what? I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, that which was, that which is, and that which is to come. And what else does he say? I have the keys to death and Hades. I snatched them away from Satan. Not only could no power in the world keep him in the tomb, no power in the world could put him back in it. He's in control. He's the power source. Lazarus had to die again. At some point, his mortal life was going to come to an end, and he was going to die for a second time. 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 16, when Jesus returns, there's going to be a shout, and there's going to be a trumpet, and there's going to be archangels, there's going to be flaming swords, and the dead are going to rise. And no power in existence can prevent that from happening. We will come out of the grave. Why? Because He has that power. Because He's the resurrection. He's the life. But the question I want you to understand this afternoon, the question I want you to ponder, is which resurrection will be yours? Is it going to be Lazarus's? And I'll explain this in a minute. Or is it going to be Jesus's? In John chapter 5 and verse 29, Jesus describes two resurrections. One's to life, one's to death. It's based on the life that we live in this world. It's based on the deeds. It's based on judgment. It's based on obedience to the gospel. And we can roll all of those things together in the New Testament to get the formula of what it's based on. But I want you to understand this. What I mean by that connection is Lazarus had to die a second time physically. So his resurrection, that first one, was not permanent. Ours is going to be permanent, but it is either to death again, second death, a lake of fire, or it's to life, to eternal life, in the presence of the Father and the Son. Which one is yours? You see, when I obeyed the gospel, get this, hear this, please understand it. When you obeyed the gospel, even though we have to shake off this shell at some point, we shook off the death clothes at that moment. We took on life. We took on life eternal. And we took on life eternal that even when the mortal part of me passes, the rest of me lives forever. Which resurrection is yours? If you come up out of the watery grave and are resurrected to new life, that life resurrection is yours forever. If you've not obeyed the gospel this morning, come shake off your death clothes. Come put on the new resurrection and the life. If you are a child of God and for some reason you've walked away from it and you need to be forgiven, please come home. Resurrection to life or resurrection to eternal death as we stand and sing.